You're standing in a bookshop you've never been in before. Rain on the glass. Shelves that smell like someone else's lifetime. You pull a book off the shelf, not because the title called you, because something behind it did. You open it to a random page, and there's a sentence there that has no business knowing you. The door was never locked. There was a young priest who spent his whole life searching for that door. He crossed an ocean for it, lost his faith for it, watched everything he believed in fall apart for it. He forgot how to pray. That's where this begins. County Cork, 1921. A stone church that smelled like rain and candle wax, and the kind of silence that should hold answers but doesn't. Joseph Murphy had been kneeling in churches like this since he could walk. The prayers came easy, memorized before he understood them, repeated until they became rhythm, then habit, then nothing at all. He was training for the priesthood, not because he'd been called, because in Bantry, in that era, if you were bright and poor and searching, the church was the only door they showed you. But the door led to a corridor, and the corridor led to another door. And behind that door was the same room he started in. He asked the questions you're not supposed to ask. Not out loud, never out loud. In the space between the prayer and the amen. Is anyone listening? Has anyone ever listened? Or am I just talking to stone? His mouth said, "Save me," but the feeling underneath said, "I'm not worth saving." Two signals. One voice saying the prayer, another voice, deeper, older, more honest, saying something else entirely. The silence answered him, not with words, with absence. So he left. Not the church, Ireland. Packed a leather bag, walked to the harbor, and boarded a ship with £5 and a name they'd later misspell on the other side. He crossed the Atlantic in steerage, gray water, gray sky, gray future, and arrived in a country that didn't need another Irish boy who could recite Latin. He became a pharmacist, stood behind a counter in New York, measuring powders and counting pills while his mind was somewhere else entirely. The hands worked, the mind searched. He wandered into Emmett Fox's church on a Wednesday evening, the Church of the Healing Christ. A man at the podium was saying things Murphy had never heard a minister say. That the mind wasn't just thinking, it was building. That every thought carried a blueprint. That somewhere beneath the surface of your awareness, something was listening to every word you said to yourself. And it didn't hear the words, it heard the feeling underneath them. Murphy sat in the back row and felt the floor shift beneath him. But knowing didn't change anything. He studied Hindu philosophy, sat with Buddhist teachers, read Troward, Quimby, William James. He tried visualization, tried affirmation, tried silence. Every technique worked, for a week, maybe two. Then the old patterns came back, the old voice, the old weight in his chest in the dark. Because the techniques were addressed to the surface. His conscious mind said the affirmation, "I am whole, I am enough," while his body stayed tense with doubt. Two signals, the subconscious heard both, and the feeling always won. He'd spent 20 years searching for the door, and he was the thing standing in front of it. Then the worst thing happened. Not to his ideas, to someone he loved. His mother was dying. A small room in Los Angeles, curtains drawn against too much afternoon light. The diagnosis was clear. The doctors were gentle, in the way doctors are gentle when they've stopped trying. Murphy sat beside her bed. He was not a young man anymore. 3 decades studying the mind, lectured about it, written about it, built an entire theology around the idea that consciousness shapes reality. And now reality was taking the one person who'd believed in him before he believed in anything. He tried everything he knew. He spoke the affirmations. He held the visualizations. He did everything he'd taught 1,000 people in 1,000 rooms. Nothing moved. And for the first time in his life, he saw why. He was doing it again. The same thing he'd done in the stone church in Bantry. The same thing he'd done in every technique, every system, every late-night study session for 30 years. His mouth was saying heal, but his body was saying desperate. His words were saying, she'll be fine, but his feeling was screaming, I'm losing her. Two signals. The subconscious heard the feeling. It always hears the feeling. You know this, not from a book, from your own life. You've said the affirmation while your jaw was clenched. You've visualized the future while your chest was tight with doubt. You've told yourself, I'm fine, in a voice that proved you weren't. He stopped trying. Not as a strategy, because he had nothing left. His hands unclenched. His shoulders dropped. Something in him that had been clenched for 30 years released. Not because he let go, because his grip finally exhausted itself. And in that collapse, in the space where his effort used to be, something else appeared. Not a thought, not a technique, a stillness that had been waiting underneath everything. She opened her eyes the next morning. The doctors had no language for it. Murphy did, but it wasn't the language he'd been using for 30 years. It was simpler, quieter. When his conscious mind finally went silent, when the gatekeeper stopped arguing, the subconscious received a feeling with nothing contradicting it. For the first time, there was no static, no resistance, no gap between what he was saying and what he felt. He didn't try to force her to be well. He rested in the quiet memory of her being whole, the sound of her laugh, the steadiness of her hands, the way she said his name, until the fear forgot to look for him. And in that absence of fear, the feeling arrived clean, whole, uncontested. Murphy would later call it the subconscious mind. Not because he'd read it in a textbook, because he'd watched it save his mother's life. It doesn't argue with what you give it. It doesn't judge. It can't tell the difference between a memory and a feeling you chose on purpose. It builds from whatever you hand it. Every worry you've rehearsed late at night, every failure you've replayed until it felt like prophecy, it heard all of it, and it built accordingly. But it also hears this, right now. Whatever you're feeling while these words land, it's listening. He spent the rest of his life trying to give this away. Wrote 30 books. Filled a church in Los Angeles every Sunday for 28 years. Millions bought his books, but most of them missed the secret. They saw magic, manifestation, a trick you could use to get what you want. But that was never the door. The door was the moment you stop performing for your own mind. The moment the words and the feeling become the same thing. It's simpler than any technique, and closer than any book. The rain is still on the glass. The bookshop hasn't changed, but the weight in your hands feels different now. Lighter. Like something you've been gripping for years, just unclenched. He forgot how to pray. That's when the prayer began. Close the book. The door is behind your eyes.
This is just the beginning of understanding yourself. Subscribe to continue the journey within. Thanks for being here and see you in the next video.